Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Mr. McAloon, for those of you who don't know. I didn't find out I was actually talking this morning until about 6:30 last night. So I made a frantic sort of dash to try to put something together. And I admit that I'm quite nervous about giving the talk. So I went on the internet and I started typing in how to give a talk, how to give a speech. They said I should tell a joke, so here it goes. Why does a seagull fly over the sea? Because if it flew over the bay, it would be called a bagel. A bagel. Bagel. Get it? Bagel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I have another one. Knock, knock. Orange. Oh, wait a minute. I messed that up. No, hang on. Forget. Anyway, well, that did seem to work, but they said if it didn't work, that I can go for cheap applause. How about a round of applause for the class of 2014? No? How about 2015? Oh, okay. Very good. So, right, excellent. Okay, so I had a pleasure of teaching many of the seniors here as upper mids and gotten to know them really well since then. But I also love my upper mids that I teach now. I think they're fantastic, and I'm very fortunate to have gotten to know them, and I'm very lucky to actually teach here. And it's true. And in fact, we're all lucky to be here. And this is sort of what I wanted to talk about today. My friends used to think I was always lucky because I was finding money on the ground, the odd quarter here, even the dollar once in a while. And it's probably why I became an entomologist, because I was always looking for money on the ground, and I noticed these insects running around. I said, wow, that's kind of fun and interesting. So anyway, luck is defined as a chance happening or that which happens beyond a person's control, and luck can be good or bad. Anyway, my question for you is, what is luck? And what does it mean to be lucky? And where does luck come from? And in some cases, at least in my case, I think I may have at least part of an answer. May I have the slides, please? When I was growing up, I spent my warm summer days, oh, here's the luck. So maybe change the slide, please. Warm summer days with my grandmother at her house. This is when everyone goes, "Aw." It's hashtag TBT, right? She was my nanny. There's my sister. There's me in the background. She was from Argentina and spoke little English. Each morning, I went to her house. I was treated to what I thought every other child on summer vacation was also being treated to. A crackling AM radio blaring, WLBA's Música Tropical with smells of semolina dough rising, and yerba mate brewing in a mug on the counter. My cup of mate cocido con leche could be waiting with an anisette toast on a little tray before breakfast. I don't think I need to tell you where I started nurturing my fat cells. Looking back now, I see that my summer experience was quite unique, and that wasn't so clear to my young self. I didn't know that eating empanadas was out of the ordinary. I didn't know that any other kids didn't drink mate. I didn't know why the other kids at soccer practice didn't know that Argentina won the World Cup in 1978. And I didn't know that other kids didn't stay over their grandmas to fall asleep to Sábado Gigante on Univision, the Spanish channel TV. I didn't always know that there were differences in my family, and nothing was ever explained to me, nor did I ask. It just was. I was probably because my noni didn't feel the need to trouble me with explanations, just love, attention, and care. She didn't tell me her story because later, as I found out, it was complex, riddled with hardship and memories that were probably too painful and not something a child needed to hear. Everything was happy as I grew up until things started to change in the summer of 1992. My grandmother started to leave the sink running after washing dishes. Soon after, she was confusing names with faces, confusing me with her brother, getting picked up on Interstate 84 by the state police. One day, she announced to us, in her typical broken English, that her father would be arriving soon for a visit and was taking her back to the farm where she lived as a child. We knew that she could no longer live alone. My family couldn't afford her care here, so she was brought back to Argentina to be with my uncle and his family. I didn't even see her off. I was 19, and my logical justification was that she didn't understand where she was anyway. She didn't recognize me, and I really didn't need to say goodbye. But the truth was that I was devastated. I was grieving her death prematurely and didn't really know how to deal with it. My noni was everything to me, and I was grieving her death prematurely, and I didn't. And I know that she loved me without reservation, and all I had now were memories. She died in 1997 in Argentina when she had stopped eating for several days. Her frail body, already punished by Alzheimer's, finally gave out. I remember that day, my mom told me she was crying and gave me a hug. I felt more sorry for my mom than for myself, since I had already mourned her loss. But I sensed there was more to my mom's sadness. She was crying out of relief, but also because it was an end to a story that no one else knew. A few years ago, almost on the 10th anniversary of my grandmother's death, I convinced my mom to finally return to Buenos Aires. This would give me a chance to reconnect with my family there and also to visit my noni's grave for the first time. Could you advance the slide, please? There's another alma. There's my mother with my sister and my grandmother. Advance the slide, please. And there's our family. You could see me there looking very excited to have my photo taken. There my uncle, my grandmother, and my aunt, and my mom and my sister there. Could you please advance the slide? And my grandmother with her sisters. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Please advance. And so there's her gravesite in Buenos Aires. My mother hadn't taken us to Argentina before this time because she was frightened by the thousands of disappearing children in the state-sponsored genocide during the dirty war of the 70s and 80s. But now we were on our way, and pieces of my noni's story emerged in the weeks preceding our trip. Can you please advance the slide? Maria Annunziata Posse was born in 1914 in Foggia, Italy, on a simple family farm. My nonni was one of 3 daughters who, after a violent, near-deadly feud with neighbors, fled to Buenos Aires, where 90% of the population is of Italian descent. Her father, my great-grandfather, cultivated wine grapes, and his career brought him in contact with many wealthy families. It was in Buenos Aires where she was arranged to marry a man from a well-to-do family, my grandfather. And they had 3 children, my 2 uncles, and my mother. He was a good father and husband, but my nonni faced difficulties with acceptance from her husband's wealthy family. Her in-laws would call her the Guinea, which is a derogatory term to define a poor, dark-skinned Southern Italian like my grandmother. Never really accepted into my family, she was in many ways shunned. Soon after my mother was born, my grandfather died of an infection that could have been cured, possibly, had antibiotics been available. Without my grandfather's presence, as a buffer, my grandmother decided to pack up with my mom and leave for New York City, where her two sisters had moved years before. Can you advance the slide, please? My grandmother and my mom found their first apartment in Manhattan in a section known as Spanish Harlem. My mother attended school at a convent, and my grandmother cleaned houses during the day and worked as a seamstress in a factory at night. The work was hard, thankless, and dangerous. I remembered my grandmother's crumpled fingers and scarred skin on her hands, always wondering how it became so disfigured. But I lost all inquisitiveness when those hands rubbed my back and sent me to sleep. Her hand had been seriously injured in a machine in a factory, and at the time, my grandmother had to move in with her sister. Life was probably stressful. She continued to work with a severe disability, but couldn't make enough money to have her own apartment. Living in a cramped apartment and trying to make ends meet, something was bound to break, and it did. My grandmother had a falling out with her sister. No one remembers how it started or what it was about, but the fight was what I call a life-changing event. Her sister Jenny made a phone call, and while my grandmother was at work one day, the police came and arrested her. It wasn't the irregular police. They were the immigration officers. My mother and my grandmother had been in the country illegally, so there they were, No papers, no home, and now no family to turn to. They were to be deported and ordered to leave the country in 2 weeks. My mother remembers my grandmother holding on to her in the cell at the immigration office and just saying over and over, "I don't know what we're going to do." My grandmother sat down, opened her address book, and wrote a letter to a friend of hers explaining her situation, and her friend lived in Waterbury, the next town over. My grandmother's friend in Waterbury knew a recent widower who was a naturalized citizen who needed his house cleaned and someone to cook for him. This was, of course, in addition to finding a paying job to support my mom. My mother and my grandmother got on a train at Grand Central and ended up in Waterbury. She walked from the station, what is known as the Brooklyn section of Waterbury, just behind the Home Depot. As my grandmother walked up a hill towards a small house, a man peered out the window of his apartment, glanced at my grandmother, and said to a friend, "Sure, I'll marry her." They had got married in a week and were able to stay in the country. I can only start to imagine the difficulties and hardship my Nani went through. But through her perseverance, she provided for someone she had never met, me. I was born because of her actions. I am standing in front of you because of her courage. We are all lucky to be here, where we are today. But lucky means to me that we are here today, almost undoubtedly through someone else's hard work and sacrifice. I believe in luck. Lots of people have similar stories, I know. In fact, many of you probably have a story just like this, but perhaps you don't know it. Remember that I only learned about my Nani's story just a few years ago, and there are certainly hundreds of other stories that I will never know. Can you imagine that some stories that have brought you to this moment in your life and may carry you on to further success? Stories that no one has told you yet. Stories of sacrifice that you may never know. The important thing to know is that they do exist. Grandmothers, grandfathers, mothers, fathers, uncles, aunts, friends, strangers, and teachers might all do something for you to help you get ahead and to help you give you something better in life, and you may never know it. This is what I consider luck. A few years ago, John Marrow, a writer for the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, spoke to the faculty here, and something he said stuck with me. He used a baseball analogy to describe our luck in life, the life, in my opinion, of most everyone in this room. He said, although when we look around and find ourselves on third base, it's important to remind ourselves that we didn't get there because we hit a triple. Thank you.